Mayday! Mayday! This is Lightning Leader. I'm taking heavy fire. They're on my 6. Wait. Jesus Christ. Red stars? They have red stars. Why are the Russians shooting at us? November 7, 1944. The skies over Yugoslavia. Nazi Germany was collapsing. But on this foggy morning, the two greatest Allied powers didn't fight the Germans. They fought each other. In a storm of friendly fire and chaos, American and Soviet pilots engaged in a brutal dogfight to the death. But to understand how this nightmare happened, we have to go back 12 hours earlier. 6 a.m., Foggia Air Base, Italy. The 82nd Fighter Group of the United States Army Air Force was preparing for a routine sweep. Their target, retreating German motorized columns in the Balkans. Leading the squadron was Lieutenant Colonel Clarence Edwinson, a veteran ace with ice in his veins. Edwinson's flight consisted of heavily armed P-38 Lightnings. These twin-engine monsters were loaded with 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon in the nose. At 350 knots, they were flying arsenals. But today, they had two deadly enemies, bad weather and bad intelligence. Their maps were outdated. As the P-38s climbed to 15,000 feet, thick clouds rolled over the Yugoslavian mountains. The Americans lost visual contact with the ground. Navigating by dead reckoning, they drifted 60 miles off course. They weren't looking at German territory anymore. They were flying directly into the Soviet Red Army's zone. Down below, the Soviet 6th Guards Rifle Corps was marching toward the city of Niš. It was a day of celebration, the anniversary of the Great October Revolution. Leading the column was Lieutenant General Grigory Kotov, a hardened hero of the Soviet Union. His men were exhausted. They had walked thousands of miles from Stalingrad, bleeding for every inch of land. Now, they thought they were safe. The Nazis were retreating. The war was almost over. At 10 a.m., the men on the ground heard a low, mechanical growl echoing through the valley. Through the mist, a group of twin boom fighters appeared. General Kotov smiled. He recognized the silhouette. American P-38s. Allies. He waved his cap at the sky. But up at 5,000 feet. Colonel Edwinson didn't see Allies. Through the dense fog, he saw gray trucks. He saw a moving column. He saw targets. Bandits at 12 o'clock low. Rolling in. That was the call. The Americans dove. Throttles pushed to the max. It was an absolute slaughter. The heavy .50 caliber rounds tore through the Soviet trucks like paper. The Red Army soldiers didn't even have time to unshoulder their rifles. They scrambled for cover, waving giant red flags desperately at the sky. General Grigory Kotov, a man who survived the bloodiest battles in human history, was cut down in seconds. Killed by his own allies. Within minutes, the valley was filled with burning trucks and the bodies of 34 Soviet soldiers. The Americans pulled up, satisfied with their run, preparing for a second pass. They had no idea they had just kicked a sleeping bear. Just 2 miles away, at the Niš airfield, pilots of the Soviet 866th Fighter Aviation Regiment heard the explosions. Among them was Captain Alexander Koldanov, a 21-year-old ace. He didn't wait for orders. He didn't wait for permission. Seeing smoke rise from his comrade's position, he sprinted toward his Yak-3. The Yak-3 was a beast. Lighter than the American P-38, it was designed for one thing, low-altitude dogfighting. Koldanov slammed the canopy shut. His eyes were burning with rage. Within moments, 9 Soviet fighters roared into the sky, hunting for the unknown attackers. 2 Allied air forces. One tragic mistake. In the skies above Niš, the deadliest friendly fire dogfight of World War II was about to begin. Breaking through the thick overcast at 3,000 feet, Captain Koldanov and his squadron of Yak-3 fighters entered the airspace above the burning convoy. Below them, black smoke choked the valley. Above them, the American P-38 Lightnings were circling like vultures, lining up for another strafing run. Koldenov saw the distinctive twin booms of the P-38s. He knew immediately these were Americans. He pushed his throttle to the firewall, his V-12 engine roaring as he climbed to intercept the lead element. He didn't want to shoot. He wanted to wave them off. He needed to get close enough to show them the giant red stars painted on his wings. But combat at 400 miles per hour leaves no time for diplomacy. As Koldenov closed the distance, the tail gunner of a nearby American P-38 spotted the incoming fighters. Through the haze of fog and adrenaline, the Americans didn't see the red stars. They saw the pointed nose and inline engines of what looked exactly like German Focke-Wulf 190s. Bogies at 6 o'clock. Brake left. Brake left. The radio channels exploded with panicked chatter. The American Lightnings dropped their external fuel tanks, the heavy metal cylinders tumbling down into the mountains. They pulled hard into vertical climbs, their powerful twin engines clawing for altitude. Instantly, the skies over Yugoslavia became a swirling furball of lethal metal. The P-38 Lightning was a heavy, high-altitude energy fighter. It excelled at diving, hitting hard, and zooming away. But here, trapped below the cloud deck at a mere 2,000 feet, they were playing the Soviets' game. The Russian Yak-3 was a lightweight wooden and duralumin masterpiece, designed specifically for low-altitude dogfights. In a horizontal turning fight, the Yaks were untouchable. A pair of P-38s dove on Koldenov's wingman, Lieutenant Shapulia. 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon tore through the Yugoslavian sky. Tracers zipped past Shapulia's cockpit, shredding his left wing. His Yak spiraled out of control, trailing a plume of white glycol smoke. Shapulia fought the stick, managing to level out just enough to bail out, his parachute blossoming just 500 feet above the tree line. Seeing his wingman shot down by allies, Koldenov's restraint vanished. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a fight for survival. Koldenov yanked his control stick hard right. He pulled 5 Gs, the crushing force pressing him deep into his seat, draining the blood from his head. The nimble Yak-3 whipped around in a tight arc, outturning the heavier American fighter. He dropped right onto the 6 o'clock of the P-38 that had just shot down Shapulia. At a range of less than 100 yards, Koldenov squeezed the trigger. His synchronized 12.7mm machine guns and 20mm cannon spat fire. The heavy Soviet shells hammered into the Americans' right engine boom. Metal shredded. The Allison engine instantly erupted into a ball of orange flame. The P-38 rolled onto its back, a burning torch falling toward the jagged rocks below. The American pilot jettisoned the canopy and threw himself into the freezing slipstream. Meanwhile, high above the chaos, Colonel Edwinson, the American commander, was trying to regain control. His squadron was scattered. The radios were a wall of screaming static. Bandits in the clouds. I can't shake him. An American pilot, Lieutenant Philip Brewer, found himself isolated. A Soviet fighter was glued to his tail. Brewer slammed his throttles forward, trying to outrun the attacker. But the Yak-3 was relentless. Bullets hammered the armor plate behind Brewer's seat, ringing like a massive bell. Shrapnel sprayed the cockpit. In a desperate gamble, Brewer pulled his nose straight up into a stall climb, hoping the lighter Russian plane would overshoot. It was a textbook maneuver. As the Yak zoomed past his canopy, Brewer looked up. Time seemed to slow down. At a distance of less than 50 feet, he looked directly into the cockpit of the enemy fighter. And right there, on the fuselage, bold and undeniable, was the bright red star of the Soviet Union. Brewer's heart stopped. He grabbed his radio transmitter, his hands shaking. Cease fire! Cease fire! They're Russians! Abort! But it was too late. The battle had taken on a life of its own. From the nearby Niš airfield, more Soviet fighters scrambled. Seeing the sky filled with dogfights, the Soviet anti-aircraft batteries on the ground opened up. Black flak bursts began to populate the sky, ripping through the aluminum skin of both American and Soviet aircraft alike. The fog of war was absolute. Captain Koldenov, having already downed one American, found himself locked in a deadly dance with the American flight leader, Colonel Edwin Sun. Edwin Sun was a veteran. He knew how to push the Lightning to its absolute limit. The two planes chased each other in a vertical loop, engines screaming at maximum RPM, neither pilot giving an inch. Edwin Sun inverted his plane at the top of the loop, using the P-38's heavy weight to plunge toward the Earth. Koldenov followed, diving straight down, the airspeed indicator on his Yak-3 pushing past the red line. The airframe shuddered violently. Rivets groaned under the immense stress. As they plummeted toward the valley floor, Koldenov finally managed to pull alongside the American colonel. Flying wingtip to wingtip at over 300 knots, the Soviet ace wildly gestured out of his cockpit, pointing to the massive red star on his plane's fuselage. He was screaming, though the American couldn't hear a word over the roar of the engines. Edwin Sun looked to his right. He saw the frantic Russian pilot. He saw the red star. The blood drained from his face. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't shooting at Nazis. He was slaughtering his own allies. But as Edwin Sun reached for the radio to order an immediate retreat, a new group of American P-38s, returning from another patrol, suddenly dropped out of the clouds. Seeing their commander engaged with unknown fighters, they didn't wait to identify the targets. They armed their guns, pushed their throttles forward, and dove straight into the meat grinder. The new wave of American P-38 Lightnings tore out of the cloud deck like avenging angels. Seeing the chaotic furball below, they didn't hesitate. They locked onto the nimble Soviet Yaks, thumbed their gun switches, and unleashed a wall of .50 caliber lead. The sky over Niš became a complete nightmare. More Soviet planes were hit. The air was thick with the black smoke of burning engines and the white trails of tracer fire. It was a tragedy compounding by the second. Colonel Edwin Sun, now fully aware of the horrific mistake, screamed into his radio transmitter. But the local channels were jammed with the terrified shouts of 30 different pilots. Nobody was listening. Adrenaline had taken over. Seeing the slaughter about to escalate, the young Soviet ace, Captain Alexander Koldenov, made a decision that defied all combat logic. It was suicidal. Koldenov pushed his Yak-3 into a violent, high-G dive, cutting directly across the nose of the attacking American flight. He didn't fire a single shot. Instead, he pulled up right in the center of the American formation, matching their speed at 300 knots. He was a sitting duck. As .50 caliber rounds zipped past his canopy, Koldenov aggressively rocked his wings left and right. He rolled his plane onto its side, exposing the entire top surface of his wings and fuselage to the American guns. There, painted in bright, unmistakable crimson, were the massive red stars of the Soviet Union. For 3 terrifying seconds, Koldenov held his breath, waiting for the American guns to rip his plane apart. But the guns went silent. The lead American pilot of the second wave saw the stars. The realization hit him like a bucket of ice water. He instantly snapped his P-38 up and away. At that exact moment, Colonel Edwin Sun finally managed to broadcast on the emergency guard frequency, a channel that overrode all others. His voice was shaking, cracking with desperation. All stations, this is Lightning Lead. Cease fire. Cease fire immediately. They are Russian. I repeat, the bogies are Russian. Break off an RTB. Now. The order echoed in the headsets of every American pilot. Throttles were pulled back. Gun switches were flipped to safe. The dogfight evaporated as quickly as it had begun. The P-38s pulled up sharply, using their superior climbing speed to disappear back into the gray overcast, leaving the valley in a deafening, heavy silence. Down below, the cost of the 15-minute battle was catastrophic. 34 Soviet soldiers lay dead in the mud, including Lieutenant General Grigory Kotov. 39 more were severely wounded. The road to Niš was a graveyard of burning trucks and shattered equipment. In the air, the toll was equally grim. 3 Soviet Yak-3 fighters had been shot out of the sky. 2 of their pilots were dead. The Americans lost two P-38 Lightnings, both pilots killed in action. It was the deadliest friendly fire incident between the two superpowers in World War II. When Colonel Edwinson landed his squadron back at the Foggy Air Base, there were no celebrations. The ground crews noticed the grim faces of the pilots. Gun cameras were immediately confiscated. The incident was a diplomatic catastrophe waiting to happen. If the German propaganda machine found out that the Americans and Soviets were killing each other, they would exploit it instantly. President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin had to act fast. The United States Army Air Force launched an immediate investigation. Colonel Edwinson, a decorated war hero, took full responsibility. He was quietly removed from combat duty and sent back to the United States. The American ambassador in Moscow delivered a formal, deeply apologetic letter to Stalin. They explained it was a navigation error caused by heavy fog and outdated maps. Surprisingly, Stalin accepted the apology. The Soviet Union was too close to Berlin to let this incident fracture the alliance. The bodies were buried. The reports were stamped top secret. The Niš Incident was effectively erased from history, locked away in military vaults for over 40 years. There were no villains in the skies that day. The American pilots were young men doing their duty, fighting a ghost in the fog. The Soviet pilots were defending their brothers on the ground. When the smoke cleared, there was only the mutual respect of warriors who realized they were caught in the cruel gears of war. Alexander Koldanov, the Soviet ace who risked his life to stop the slaughter, survived the war. He became one of the highest-scoring aces in Soviet history and eventually rose to the rank of Chief Marshal of Aviation. But he never forgot the day he fought the Americans, a battle that should never have happened. If you want to uncover more untold stories from the deepest shadows of military history, stories that governments tried to bury, hit that subscribe button right now. Next week, we're taking you to the freezing waters of the North Atlantic to witness the most insane submarine duel of the Cold War. You won't want to miss it. See you on the battlefield.